My fiancée forgot to hang up the phone. She was laughing with her friends, telling them how easy it was to fool me, how trusting I was, how she planned to say yes to the ring and figure out the rest later. I stood outside the shop bay with grease drying on my arms and listened to 19 minutes and 32 seconds of my life being dismantled by a woman who had no idea I was there. 3 days after that call, she showed up at my parents' house screaming, wearing an engagement ring I had already returned, demanding answers I had already given to everyone who mattered. By then the account was closed, the car loan was transferred, her belongings were boxed, and her parents had already sat in a diner and heard her voice say the words out loud. She thought she was coming to fight. She was coming to find out how completely the ground had already shifted. My name is Jake. I am 31 years old and I work as a diesel mechanic. I spent 18 months rebuilding a foreclosed house with my own hands, replacing floors, fixing plumbing, repainting every room, because I wanted something real to offer. I spent 4 months of overtime saving for an $8,000 engagement ring. I had a reservation at Santino's, a plan for her family to hide in the back, a speech I had rewritten until it felt honest. I was not a man who did things halfway. Brittany had told me once that she loved that about me, that I was steady, that she could count on me. I believed her for 2 years. The call happened on a Tuesday. I was on lunch break, sitting outside the shop in the sun, nothing on my mind except dinner. She picked up mid-conversation with her friends, the way you answer when you think you know who it is and you are already talking. She did not realize her mistake. I heard her voice shift into something looser, the voice people use when they think no one is listening. I heard her say, "God, he is so exhausting." I heard her say, "The idiot does not even know I am screwing Corey. Every time I tell him I am with the girls, I am at Corey's apartment. 3 months and he has not suspected a thing." I heard her friend Megan ask how she kept a straight face. I heard Brittany say, "It is easy. Jake is so trusting it is almost sad." I heard her say Corey knows how to be spontaneous, that I had to plan everything like we were launching a space shuttle. Then someone asked about the engagement. I heard Brittany say she would say yes, enjoy the party, then decide what to do. Maybe Corey will commit. If not, at least I will have the ring. I stood there for 19 minutes and 32 seconds. My phone logged the call. I did not hang up. I did not say a word. I just stood in the sun with grease drying on my arms and let every sentence land exactly where it was supposed to. When the call ended, I did not go back inside. I sat in my truck, very still, and let the information settle into something solid. Then I drove to Kevin's house. Kevin is an insurance adjuster. His entire job is documentation, verification, and building airtight cases before anyone makes a move. I told him everything. He listened without interrupting, asked 3 questions, and said, "Okay, we are doing this correctly." We spent 3 hours at his kitchen table building what he called Operation Clean Exit. Not revenge. Not a scene. A clean, documented, irreversible exit with no room for reinterpretation. Kevin had a way of thinking about situations like this the way he thought about claims, methodically, without emotion, focused entirely on what could be proven and what could not be undone. Left to myself, I might have called Brittany that night and said something I could not take back. Kevin kept me focused on the outcome instead of the feeling. That discipline saved me from every mistake I would have regretted. Step 1 was the joint account. We had opened it 8 months earlier for household expenses, both contributing equally. I went to the bank the next morning, withdrew exactly my half, and got printed receipts showing the remaining balance and the date. Everything documented, nothing that could be called theft, nothing that could be disputed. Step 2 was the car. I had co-signed her lease 2 years ago when her credit was thin. I called the dealership and started the transfer paperwork. It took 2 days and a small fee. Her financial decisions were no longer my liability. Step 3 was the one that cost me the most, not in money, but in something harder to name. I called Robert, her father. Robert had taught me how to tune carburetors when I was 23. He had shaken my hand at every family dinner for 2 years and called me son without any irony in it. He was the kind of man who meant what he said and expected the same from everyone around him. I told him I needed to speak with him and Loretta in person, that it was about Brittany, and that it was serious. He did not ask questions. He just said, "Come over." We met at a diner near their house. I sat across from both of them, took out my phone, and pressed play. Her voice filled the space between us. The idiot does not even know I am screwing Corey. Every time I tell him I am with the girls, I am at Corey's apartment. 3 months and he has not suspected a thing. Loretta cried quietly, the kind of crying that is more grief than anger. Robert sat completely still, his jaw working, the muscles in his face tight. When it reached the part about the ring, "At least I will have the ring," I stopped it. Robert said Corey's name slowly, like he was tasting something bad. He said, "The divorced guy, she told us he was just an old friend." His voice cracked when he said, "He sat at my table, ate my food, shook my hand." I told him I had been planning to propose that weekend, that the family was supposed to be hiding in the kitchen at Santino's. Robert reached across the table and grabbed my shoulder. He said, "What do you need from us?" I said, "Be there when I confront her." He said, "We will be there." And I believed him the same way I had always believed men who meant what they said. Now here is where it gets more complicated, because Corey had his own situation unraveling at the same time, and it was about to collide with mine in a way I had not planned for. Corey and I had been friends since high school, not close the way Kevin and I were close, but the kind of friend you grew up with, someone you trusted without thinking too hard about it. What I did not know, and what Kevin found out through a mutual contact 2 days after our planning session, was that Corey had been quietly telling people in our circle a version of events that positioned him as the victim. He had been saying Brittany had pursued him, that he had tried to end it multiple times, that he felt trapped. He was building a narrative before the story even broke publicly, which meant he had known something was coming and had started managing his reputation in advance. Kevin told me this on Thursday evening. I sat with it for a while. Then I made one additional move. I texted Corey directly. I kept it short. I told him I knew everything, that I had known for 3 days, and that I was handling it Sunday. I told him I was coming to his apartment Saturday morning to collect my tools, which I had lent him 6 months ago. I said nothing else. His response came back in under 2 minutes. He said, "Jake, I am sorry, man. I know this is bad." I told him I would be there at 10 and that I expected the tools to be ready. He said, "Of course, whatever you need." What I did not tell him was that Kevin was coming with me, and that Kevin had a very specific reason for being there beyond moral support. Saturday morning, Kevin and I drove to Corey's apartment. Corey answered the door looking like he had not slept. My tools were already packed in a bag by the entrance, which told me he had been awake thinking about this for hours. He tried to start a conversation, something about how things had gotten complicated, how he had not meant for it to go this far. I picked up the tool bag, looked at him, and said, "I am not here to talk. I am here for my tools." He nodded. Then Kevin stepped forward and handed him a single printed page. Kevin had drafted a written statement, 1 page, outlining the timeline of the affair as I knew it, with a signature line at the bottom. Kevin told him, calmly, that signing was optional, but that if the situation ever became a legal matter, a voluntary statement on record would be better for him than not having one. Corey stared at the paper for a long moment. Something moved across his face, guilt or calculation or exhaustion, I could not tell which. Then he signed it. Kevin folded it into his jacket pocket. We left. Corey stood in his doorway watching us go, and I did not look back once. Sunday came the way Sundays do when you have been dreading and preparing for them at the same time, too fast and too slow simultaneously. I had spent 3 days acting normal. Brittany had called twice, texted about our anniversary plans, sent me a photo of a restaurant she wanted to try. I had responded briefly and without warmth, which she apparently read as me being tired from work. She had no idea. I had returned the ring to the jeweler on Friday and gotten a full refund. I had packed her belongings into boxes, neatly, without breaking anything, and stacked them in the spare room. I had written nothing angry, sent no dramatic messages, made no gestures. I had just prepared, quietly and completely, and waited. Her parents arrived at 2 in the afternoon. Robert and Loretta sat in the living room, and I could see the weight of 3 days on both of them. Loretta had brought a casserole dish, which she set on the kitchen counter without explanation, the way people bring food when they do not know what else to do with their hands. Robert sat with his hands on his knees and said very little. Kevin arrived 20 minutes later and took a seat near the window. I had asked him to be there not to participate but to witness, because I had learned in the last 3 days that having a witness changes the temperature of a room in ways that are hard to explain but impossible to ignore. The four of us waited in near silence, and the waiting itself said everything about how seriously we were all taking what was about to happen. Brittany arrived at 3. She came through the front door the way she always did, calling my name before she was fully inside, dropping her keys on the entry table. She stopped when she saw her parents. Her face moved through surprise, then confusion, then something that looked like calculation, all in about 2 seconds. She looked at me. I told her to sit down. She said, "What is going on? Why are your parents here? Why is Kevin here?" I told her to sit down again. She sat. I did not make a speech. I did not list her failures or describe my pain or give her the opportunity to interrupt and redirect. I took out my phone, opened the recording, and pressed play. Her voice filled the room. The idiot does not even know I am screwing Corey. Every time I tell him I am with the girls, I am at Corey's apartment. 3 months and he has not suspected a thing. I watched her face go white. I watched her look at her mother, then at her father, then back at me. I let it run until the part about the ring. At least I will have the ring. Then I stopped it. The room was completely silent. Brittany opened her mouth and closed it. Then she said, that is out of context. Robert said her name, just her name, nothing else, in a voice I had never heard him use before. She looked at him, and whatever she saw in his face stopped her from continuing. Loretta was not crying this time. She was looking at her daughter with something harder than grief, something closer to recognition, like she was seeing what she had suspected for a long time and had hoped she was wrong about. Brittany turned back to me and said, "Jake, we can talk about this. We can work through this." I told her there was nothing to work through. I told her the account had been separated, the car loan transferred, and her belongings were boxed in the spare room. I told her I had returned the ring. I told her I needed her to take her things and go. She started crying, then arguing, then crying again. She said I was making a permanent decision based on one conversation. I told her it was not one conversation. It was 3 months of decisions she had made every single day. She looked at her father and said, "Dad, tell him he is overreacting." Robert stood up slowly, the way large men stand when they have decided something, and said, "I think you should do what he asked." She stared at him. He said, "I am ashamed of you." 4 words. They landed harder than anything else said in that room, harder than the recording, harder than my silence, harder than anything I could have planned. Brittany went very still. Then she started moving toward the spare room. It took 4 trips to load her car. Nobody helped her. Kevin and I stood in the living room. Robert and Loretta sat at the kitchen table. Nobody spoke. When she was done, she came back to the doorway and looked at me one last time. She said, "You planned all of this." I said, "You gave me 3 days." She left. What I had not anticipated was what happened in the hour after she drove away. Robert and Loretta stayed. Loretta put the casserole in the oven without asking, and the 4 of us sat at the kitchen table while it heated. Robert told me that he and Loretta had talked every night since the diner, that they had gone back through 2 years looking for things they had missed. He said he was sorry for things he could not have known to prevent. It was not a logical apology, but I understood what he meant by it. He said, "You are still welcome at this table." I told him I appreciated that. I meant every word of it, and I think he knew that. Kevin left around 6. Before he went, he handed me a copy of Corey's signed statement, folded in an envelope with my name on it. He said, "You probably will not need this, but keep it somewhere safe." I put it in the filing cabinet next to the house documents and the bank receipts, in a folder I labeled simply as done. Then I sat alone in the house I had rebuilt with my own hands and ate Robert and Loretta's casserole and did not feel victorious. I felt clear. That was enough for one night, and it turned out to be enough for a long time after. 3 days later, Brittany showed up at my parents' house. My mother called me while it was happening, her voice low and controlled, telling me that Brittany was in the driveway screaming, demanding to talk to me, saying I had humiliated her in front of her family and that I owed her an explanation. I told my mother to tell her I had nothing more to say. My mother went back outside and delivered that message. Brittany screamed for another 10 minutes, then left. My father, who had been watching from the window the entire time, called me afterward. He said, "Son, I think you handled this right." My father was not a man who gave compliments easily or often. That one meant something. The news about Corey spread through our circle the way these things always do, faster than anyone intends and with more detail than anyone planned. Kevin had quietly shared the relevant facts with a few key people, not to cause damage but to close the gap between the story Corey was telling and what had actually happened. The version where Corey was the reluctant victim of a complicated situation did not survive contact with a signed statement and the timeline. People who had been nodding along to his version went quiet. A few of them reached out to me directly, not to apologize exactly, but to let me know they understood now. I did not need their understanding, but I appreciated that the record was straight. Brittany and Corey did not last. I heard this through mutual contacts about 6 weeks after the Sunday confrontation. The relationship that had seemed worth burning everything down for had not survived being exposed to daylight. Corey went back to telling people he had been the one being pursued, that he had tried to end it, that he was the one who had been manipulated. Nobody believed him, partly because of what Kevin had shared, and partly because people who sign written statements and then claim victimhood tend not to be very convincing to anyone paying attention. Brittany had moved back in with her parents. I heard that Robert had made returning the family car a condition of her staying there, which was a detail I had not expected but which told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he had taken that diner conversation and everything that followed it. There is one more thing I want to say about Kevin, because he deserves more than a footnote in this story. Kevin did not have to spend 3 hours at his kitchen table helping me build a plan. He did not have to drive to Corey's apartment on a Saturday morning. He did not have to sit by the window on a Sunday afternoon as a witness to something that was not his problem. He did all of it because that is the kind of person he is, steady, methodical, and completely without drama. I've thought about that a lot in the months since. The people who show up when things fall apart are not always the ones you expect. Kevin had never been the loudest person in any room we had shared. He turned out to be the most important one. The house sold 8 months later. I had not planned to sell it, but living alone in rooms built for a life that no longer existed started to feel like a choice I was making every single day, and eventually I stopped wanting to make it. I listed it in the spring and sold it in 3 weeks for significantly more than I had put into it. I used the money to start over somewhere smaller and quieter, a place with no history attached to it, no rooms that remembered anything. I did not feel sentimental about leaving. I had built it well. Someone else would live in it well. That was the point of building it in the first place. I am not telling this story because I want credit for how I handled it. I spent a long time after that Tuesday wondering if I had missed signs I should have caught, if being trusting was the same as being naive, if planning carefully was somehow the thing that made me easy to underestimate. I have stopped asking those questions. The answer is that I was a man who built things carefully and trusted completely, and someone decided that made me a safe target. The building is not the problem. The trust is not the problem. The problem belonged entirely to her, and she is the one living inside the consequences of it now. I rebuilt a foreclosed house from the floor up with my own hands. I have rebuilt harder things since. Some losses do not break you. They just show you exactly how much you are capable of carrying, and exactly who was never worth the wait.